Dan Simmons, The Terror. At the heart of the novel lies the real-life disaster of John Franklin's expedition. In 1845, two British ships, Erebus and Terror, set out in search of a passage through the Arctic and vanished into the ice. No one knows what truly happened there, and Dan Simmons transforms this historical mystery into an encyclopedic novel about survival, fear, and human dignity. Despite its popularity, the book still feels underrated to me. With the obsessive precision of a science fiction writer, Simmons approaches the historical material with extraordinary meticulousness, rendering every detail with almost unbearable clarity. You can hear the ice creaking, smell the stench of rotting meat, feel the cold slowly driving men mad. There is hunger here, amputations, madness, and cannibalism. Life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. What Simmons ultimately offers is a deeply masculine philosophy of accepting the inevitable. It is embodied in the novel's central figure, Captain Francis Crozier, a broken man, a drunk, a soul profoundly lost. And yet it is he who must undergo a painful inner transformation, a journey that is, without question, a movement toward the light. Hernan Diaz, In the Distance. A Swedish boy, Håkan, sets out for the United States with his older brother in search of a better life, but a chance accident separates them. Håkan is left alone, and from that moment on begins a journey that will last a lifetime, a passage across a brutal and untamed American West in the mid-19th century. I read the book in a single sitting. Such is its hypnotic force. The landscapes shift constantly. Ochre deserts, pale yellow plains, open prairies, canyons, an almost unimaginable white salt flat, and snow-covered mountains. Yet wherever the protagonist finds himself, these spaces steadily dissolve into a single, endless wasteland. Within this boundless emptiness, the protagonist, who grows from a frail adolescent into a towering, almost mythic figure, undergoes a profound inner transformation. An experimental Western, an odyssey through solitude. A novel about a man who is left completely alone, without connections, without language, without anyone to rely on, and who embarks on a journey that feels like a rite of passage. In the Distance explores radical self-sufficiency and the true cost of isolation, an experience familiar to anyone who has ever been left entirely alone in an indifferent world. Michel Houellebecq, Annihilation. Possibly Houellebecq's strangest and most controversial novel, a book already seen by many as the author's swan song. On one level, it is unmistakably classic Houellebecq, with all the trademarks readers have come to expect. Near-future speculation, political intrigue, terrorists, criticism of social institutions and consumer society, cynical meditations on the decay of civilization, the inevitable visit to a prostitute, and the melancholy reflections on sex and marriage that run through so much of his work. The plot unfolds at full speed. France, 2027, in the middle of a presidential campaign, with terrorists armed with artificial intelligence. At first, everything moves along in that distinctly Houellebecqian way, cynical, unsettling, and sharply contemporary. But gradually, something unexpected happens. Beneath all the political intrigue and social commentary emerges a surprisingly tender and deeply moving story about the return of love, sad yet profoundly hopeful. That is precisely why Annihilation resonates so strongly with male readers. At its core, it is an extraordinarily perceptive novel about the emotional isolation of modern men in the digital age, about aging, the fear of illness, and the inability to speak openly about feelings. Philip Roth, Portnoy's Complaint. Often described as the most repulsive novel ever to become a bestseller, Portnoy's Complaint was both a literary sensation and a public scandal. In its first year alone, the novel sold more than 400,000 hardcover copies in the United States, outselling even The Godfather by Mario Puzo. At the same time, it provoked outrage. Many within the Jewish community and countless critics were furious, while in Australia, the novel was banned outright and police removed copies from bookstores. 33-year-old Alexander Portnoy lies on a psychoanalyst's couch and pours out everything: his neuroses, sexual fantasies, self-loathing, problems with his mother, guilt, fears, insecurities, his Jewish identity, his relationships with women. At times, Roth's prose turns shockingly explicit and obscene. Portnoy's obsession with masturbation alone was enough to make the novel infamous. Portnoy wants to be a good man, yet remains trapped by lust. He rebels against the world he comes from, yet remains painfully dependent on it. He longs for the world of normal Americans, yet despises it. He loves women, yet cannot reconcile love with sexual desire. Portnoy's Complaint is a novel about what it means to be a man torn apart by contradictions. A man who no longer knows who he is meant to be, or how to reconcile the contradictions within himself. Yet the scandal surrounding the novel has often overshadowed its emotional and psychological depth. Vladimir Nabokov, Despair. What if a man's greatest enemy is not the world around him, but his own belief in his exceptionalism? Despair is built around precisely that idea. In the 1930s, Vladimir Nabokov translated the novel into English himself and submitted it to a publisher known for pulp fiction and cheap crime novels. After all, he had written something close to a detective story, a novel filled with murder, fraud, and deception. Commercially, however, the experiment failed. Nabokov earned only $40 from the book, a pitiful sum even by the standards of the time. Readers simply did not understand what he was doing. Years later, Nabokov would describe Despair as a rhinoceros in a world of hummingbirds. The protagonist, Herman, is a successful and deeply self-satisfied man, convinced he is smarter than everyone around him. One day in Prague, he encounters a drifter named Felix and freezes in shock. Herman becomes convinced that he has found his exact double, his perfect mirror image. He immediately devises what he believes to be a brilliant plan: murder the double, stage his own death, collect the insurance money, and at the same time create a perfect work of art, a crime so elegant that the world will admire it. The catch, however, is that the resemblance exists only in Herman's imagination. Nabokov takes the classic doppelganger trope and turns it completely inside out. The entire novel unfolds as the confession of a man so infatuated with his own intellect that he can no longer distinguish fantasy from reality. Despair is a novel about male ego, narcissism, and the longing to feel special, chosen, set apart from everyone else. But Nabokov is merciless toward his protagonist. Herman is not a genius, but a fool. He fails to notice that his wife is cheating on him, that his business is collapsing, and that he himself is little more than an empty shell trying to transform life into a beautiful illusion. In the end, his obsession with himself methodically destroys him, and by the final pages, the perfect crime has collapsed into total failure. That is the novel's central lesson for men. The beautiful illusion of one's own exceptionalism can be fatally dangerous. A perfect book for anyone too convinced that they are fully in control of circumstances, of other people, and of their own life. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you enjoyed it.